I need to put this video out now. Big changes are on the horizon. Hell, they're already here. It's a massive wave that's going to change a ton of what we see on a day-to-day basis. After decades of art and global communication, we're shifting into the first era of design to be birthed out of Web 3.0. After almost 20 years, it's time to say goodbye to the minimalist aesthetic that has tainted our movies, fast food chains, and technology. We're on the verge of another digital revolution, and like clockwork, the Frutiger styles of the 90s and 2000s are creeping back into the mainstream a little more each day. We're really living in an incredible time. You can show up to school wearing pretty much anything that was remotely popular in the last 60 years and no one will bat an eye. Which also makes you wonder why it seems odd to wear anything before that time period, like the lady who RPs every day like it's the 1950s, or that kid in Math 101 who wears a suit and fedora to class. But that's beside the point. In 2023, we can eat whatever we want for breakfast. Feeling extra hungry? Have some steak and eggs made of buffalo and ostrich. Order the spiciest chip on the planet, then stick your fingers in a tub of citric acid. Want to literally change the fabric of the universe? Find the right chemical supplier and licensing, and you can play God. Just don't make meth, please. We're living like the kings of the past, where as long as you have a decent income and a good living situation, you can just sit on your throne all day. And surprisingly, that's exactly what we're doing. Not only are we assaulting our GI tract every time we eat Taco Bell, but we're reinforcing that behavior with our poor habits. In 2021, a study out of the Turkish Medical Student Journal found that almost 70% of students aged 18 to 21 use their phones while on the toilet. This was a small sample size, sure, but it's directly in line with data collected by NordVPN, the sponsor of someone else's video. 60 to 80% of their customers use the phone while on the toilet, and the most popular activities were unsurprisingly browsing social media and the news. 18 to 21-year-olds make up a good chunk of my audience, and while you might be watching this on the toilet as I speak, I do want to point out that there hasn't been much fluctuation in the time we've spent in the bathroom since before the pandemic, or even before the internet as a whole. Sure, phones have completely changed our brains, but they're only slightly more addictive than the puzzles, papers, and magazines that used to serve the same purpose. What I mean is that what you're doing in the bathroom probably isn't going to dictate how long you're in there, unless it directly relates to your intestines. But when you think about how quickly someone consumes content on a screen versus a piece of paper, you begin to reconsider how precious your time is to those who could potentially take advantage of it. But there is at least one silver lining to this constant consumption of content, and it's that creators are now forced to innovate and stand out amongst the sea of competitors. Now, this isn't a green light to waste your time online, but it's hard to ignore that the engagement of users is giving advertisers and designers a ton of new feedback and data to work with. Apart from AI, I think a huge part of the budding Web 3.0 is the amount of data we now have access to. Not only can we learn exactly what our audience responds to and act accordingly, or not accordingly, we can see all of the data from the past and experiment with the endless and unique styles and graphics from all over time and space. This is also a big factor in the nostalgia explosion of the 2010s, since people didn't need to track down their grandparents to learn about life in the 1900s and beyond. Graphic design in the 1800s was simple, based entirely on hand lettering, printing, and creating in the physical world. Cartoons and photography were also included, but it wasn't until the invention of computers that artists were finally able to create and adjust things at the speed of their own mind. The internet was a growing platform that needed people to work on it, and Web 1.0 was becoming increasingly more interactive. As the flat web pages of the 90s faded into the background, designers found new ways to use high-definition computer graphics to let users know that, yeah man, you can totally click that button now. Where stores used to list email addresses and phone numbers now stood digital shopping carts and user-friendly navigation on sites like Amazon and Google. It's hard to even imagine these massive companies as just websites made up of a wall of code that some dude typed out in his basement. Web design aesthetics are a particularly touchy subject online because of how young the internet is and how quickly it's been growing. Not to mention, it's hard to describe wider trends as they happen, since a lot of history relies on retrospectives and comparisons to what happens next. So by that logic, we should start with the first step into a new millennia, the Y2K aesthetic. Like I mentioned before, computers were big on interactivity, so much of Y2K was focused on creating a feeling of depth and immersion. This is really special to me because it encompasses so much of my early days online, like the Adobe Flash games and animations, the Nintendo DS, and the old family computer and all of its games. And speaking of computers, Apple and Microsoft were two industry leaders that perpetuated the digital styles of the time. Apple actually popularized the concept of a desktop with folders, and Windows 95 helped usher in the first explosion of PC gaming, which only pressured the industry engineers, programmers, and designers to create bigger and better projects. But the big thing that was still holding designers back was the technology. It was just too difficult to get high-resolution images to work efficiently on the current hardware. but it wasn't long before that dream was made a reality, and arguably the greatest catalyst for the end of the Y2K era of design is either staring right at you or not far from you. The smartphone. More specifically, the iPhone. Even more specifically, Apple killed a whole flock of birds with this stone, man. Not only did they embrace the trends by creating a wealth of interactive icons and applications, but they were designed to look like buttons you could actually press. Older people were less familiar with digital interfaces, so this was a great way to keep them from getting intimidated. And if all else fails, just call in little Jimmy from the other room, because he'll help you figure it out. And as it turns out, children became a huge market for anything related to technology, since they have the most time to waste on video games and social media. I was once a snotty little 10-year-old with an iPod, and I was lucky enough to witness Apple's first shift from the 3D icons of iOS 4 to the sleek and flat look of iOS 5, something that has endured until this very day. The same goes for Microsoft, who ditched 3D almost entirely in the shift from Windows 7 to 8. Around this time, my family had 2 laptops, one with Windows 7 and one with 8, and seeing the side-by-side comparison had my brothers and I confused on what to think. In fact, this trend of flattening icons is something you're all probably familiar with. Take Warner Brothers, for example, who changed their logo in 2019 for the first time in almost 30 years. Granted, they have a few to choose from at any given time, but this one in particular got a ton of public backlash. In the name of minimalism, they dropped the signature golden sheen that appeared in the beginning of every Warner Brothers movie, completely ripping the nostalgia and personality out of this timeless image. In a small survey by visualobjects.com, a staggering 89% of consumers preferred the old logo, despite going entirely against what was considered the norm at the time. But if you've been around this channel for a while, you'll know that I like to play devil's advocate, especially with the things I personally dislike. And after doing digital graphics in YouTube for a while, it actually makes sense why all of these companies decided to cut back on color and dimension during this period of time. And the answer? Vector. Vectors are pretty much the Konami code for easy and beautiful marketing, when done right. If you don't know anything about computers, vectors are like regular images, but their color, shape, and size is defined by a mathematical formula instead of numbers of colors and pixels. If you have no idea what I just said, here's the best way I can explain. In Photoshop, we can make a rectangle either by drawing one or by using the rectangle tool. These are called raster and vector images respectively. There's certainly nothing wrong with drawing or painting a rectangle, but by using the built-in rectangle tool, we can change the color, the size, and even the sharpness of the corners without permanently affecting the quality. If we draw a rectangle by hand or bring one in from Google Images, we're only telling Photoshop that these pixels exist in the shape of a rectangle. The complexity lies more in the image itself, making the detail and file size much larger. Another way to think about it is that raster images are a projection of an object, while vectors themselves are the object. Vectors are smaller and less detailed, but they can be easily edited, animated, and shipped out somewhere new. And this is what I believe to be a keystone of graphic design starting in the mid-2000s, since these flatter images can be scaled to fit anything from a smart watch to a smart fridge. And when it comes to animation, hell, even I can do it. As a matter of fact, I actually used AI to make an animatronic out of my profile picture, then chopped it up and rigged it in After Effects, and voila, animation. Now, each body part is a raster image, but it could easily be simplified into vectors and become much more workable. It's almost like this is the exact reason companies would do something so drastic to modernize their logo. Because it's exactly what they did. While the edges and colors may be simple, the constant motion was a great fit for the flow of internet traffic, people on the go, and the parity between devices that became popular in the 2010s. And for that reason, this flat aesthetic has become, for many, synonymous with out-of-touch corporations who, much like vectors, only understand the world through graphs and mathematical equations. The minimalist trend caught on so quickly that it began caving in on itself. Some brands had the advantage of always having a 2D logo, but others who rebranded during that time just looked like cheap copies compared to the trendsetters. And because vector graphics can look so stunning with the right lighting, shadows, and effects, minimalism almost immediately started to look lazy and uninspired. The whole minimalist corporate aesthetic too was pretty much dead on arrival, since again it was adopted by every soulless company that's constantly competing for your attention. I don't mean any disrespect to the creators of these animations, but you can just see how simple it is to do. And the public understands this. Just look at the rejection of AI art, the explosion of anime in the West, and the way that new films are blending the medium of computer graphics and hand-drawn animation. We see the same thing in our own history, like during the Industrial Revolution, citizens began carrying handmade books with unique covers as a way of combating the newly mass-produced book market. Even further back, medieval Europeans had their own devotional prayer books called Books of Hours that basically did the same thing. An expressive form of personalized media, much like the cell phones or even the Instagram music posts of today. My point is, people aren't too stupid to see the value of art, and each generation, each century has its own books of hours, bland and uninspired art, and even its own counterculture. There's actually a phenomenon which is commonly referred to as the 20-year nostalgia cycle, which can be visible when something that was extremely out of style suddenly becomes cool again. While it isn't always exactly 20 years, it just proves that the culture is ever-changing, flowing like the waters of the Frutiger Aero realm, a clock that always circles back around, eventually. As the Zoomers grow up, we mature and understand where we came from, and choose all the best things to raise the next generation on. Why do you think we watch the same Christmas movies every year? Why does your mom always make your favorite food? Why do you visit those same places in your hometown? These are rhetorical questions, but my point is, the glossy, liquidescent, high-definition aesthetics that defined turn-of-the-century digital design is due for a revival any one of these days. And if you've been paying attention for the past couple years, many of the companies with flat, simple logos started to subtly and not so subtly reverse the changes they made. The first to tip me off was Apple, who, much like Windows, has been slowly implementing more depth, shadows, and lighting into their 2D icons over the years. I was shocked to learn that as far back as 2020, Apple began shifting away from the flat vector-style logos of the 2010s in favor of a deeper and richer look. All we need is Windows 12 to go full 3D, and it's pretty inarguable that digital graphics will continue in that direction. And it makes sense, with the rise of wearable tech and augmented reality, not to mention AI image manipulation, it's only natural that we go bigger and better. Moving into the mid-2020s, people are finally ready for a bright, new future after years of war and suffering, much like the bright new millennia that drove Frutiger Aero's debut. Frutiger Aero, also known as Web 2.0 Gloss, was a trend recognized by Adrian Frutiger, creator of the Frutiger typeface. Web 2 Gloss does a really good job depicting its relation to digital and interface design as a whole, since it was meant to mimic real buttons. What I'll refer to as Web 3 Gloss will likely serve as our guide into AR, so we'll need true-to-life detail on every image. Maybe we can attach AI to a raster image and turn it into a vector. That would be one way to combine our best methods. Or even more out there, we could use AI to break down the barriers of coding language for full integration across every platform. So if you want to be ahead of the curve, whether you're a programmer, a designer, a student, or just a casual listener, learn all you can about this stuff. But before we say our goodbyes, I've saved my most outlandish idea for last. Why don't we just replace phones with walking sticks? Like, instead of looking down at your phone, you can use the stick to help fix your posture. And they're both used to communicate. I mean, you can't text or call with a stick, but you can point at things and draw pictures. Not to mention the range and weight of your stick could help you fend off enemies pretty non-violently, or you could pass through difficult terrain by vaulting. Okay guys, that's really all I have to say. Thanks for sticking to the end of one of my less popular videos. If you want even less popular videos, check out my other channels linked in the description. I keep them pretty wound up with fresh meat, so go have a look and see if you like anything. Any questions, comments, criticisms, leave it all down below, guys. I really appreciate honest feedback because I want each video to be better than the last. Because I'm a perfectionist. Oh, also check out the merch store, guys. Link in the description. This is the back. Okay, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace. Wait a second. Yeah, next time we're doing JoJo next time.
I see grass that's green, bubbles that are blue. There's clouds in the sky and fishes too. And I think to myself, what a Frutiger world.